Today I want to cover standard practices on edge gluing two boards together to form a panel. Now before we start doing the actual gluing, we need to be very well prepared. And as you can see around me here, I have craft paper. This is in fact waxed craft paper. It is great to prevent glue drips from drying on the bench and messing up the bench surface. These T-stands are going to be used to elevate the assembly above the bench. It gives us place for our knuckles when we're tightening those clamps. Instead of trying to tighten clamps close to or on the bench, you might have found that to be difficult in the past. Some of you probably never use cauls, C-A-U-L. We have two pairs of cauls for this assembly we're going to do, and we'll discuss those in a bit. And clamps and glue. Now what you can see is everything is organized before the time. Those of you who have done some gluing in the past, experienced woodworkers especially, will agree with me that gluing up or assembly is where the stress is the highest. Okay, so we have two prepared pieces of 2x6. These have been milled flat and parallel on their faces and flat and parallel on their edges. And I have a choice with these whether to put them this orientation or in this orientation relative to each other, or that orientation, and so on. I like to call this defining the edge associations. In other words, defining which edges associate with which edges. It's called the edge associations. It's not necessarily an industry term, it's just a term that I give to my students. So when you're assembling two panels, sometimes the wood doesn't come from the same plank. Sometimes this is a different plank to that, maybe an even different tree. And it's important to try and get good grain matches, color tone matches, and to make sure you don't get jarring contrasts on the edges. Now, some of you might not care, but I do, because the little details make a difference in the whole. So in order to be sure that I have my edge associations like I want them, I'm going to take pencil and draw a simple cabinet maker's triangle across the joint. There it is there. Cabinet maker triangle across the joint. So that will remind me now that when it comes time to clamping up, that I'm not going to clamp up that way around. I'm going to be certainly clamping up that way around to complete the triangle. Okay, so let's get started. Before that, I will then put the craft paper down on the bench and my gluing stands parallel to the bench, or shall I say parallel to the glue joint. Then I take the cauls. Now you want cauls that are taped with clear plastic tape. I think it stands to reason that if you don't, you're going to glue them to your work. Because what's going to happen is these cauls, with their clear plastic surfaces facing the glue, will then support the two boards, and in some cases when your assemblies are really large, you may need 3 pairs of cauls, maybe a pair of cauls in the middle and cauls on the outside as well. But right now I'm going to use them only on the outsides. Second pair of cauls gets placed on top of the first pair of cauls. And then we're going to squeeze the cauls together to keep the vertical alignment between the two boards consistent. So we could take an F-clamp, commonly referred to as an F-clamp. It's a screw type clamp, can exert a lot of force via its screw, and now gently tighten down. You don't want to over tighten these caul clamps because you've still got to compress the glue joint down the center between the two boards. So that's the starting point. Once the glue is in place, we clamp the caul clamps in place, and then we clamp the compression clamps, which will compress the glue joint. All right, these are now ready to go. As you can see, I've opened them up so that I don't have to fiddle with them and unscrew them when I'm needing to use them. All right. So now I'm going to turn the boards on edge with the glue edges facing up. Make sure glue edges are clean, no debris on them. Now, regular yellow glue or tight bond, as the brand is that we use here, and I'm going to do a little bead of glue down the center. I'm not going to be too fussed at this stage with excess glue. Sometimes it is important to worry about excess glue, but today I'm not. Many get fussed with moving glue around with brushes and palette knives or spatulas and so on. I use on narrow edges my finger. It's not toxic. I'm not going to eat it, but it's not going to hurt me. And I find that it helps me to get control. When it comes to joinery, sure, then I use a spatula or a palette knife or something like that to get into the nooks and crannies. But here, I just want speed of use. So I want to make sure that I swipe this glue down, and then from the center of the board, spreading towards the outside to make sure that the glue is wetting the entire edge of the board. Now, there are many people that have success in gluing up by putting glue only on one edge or one face of the board. And I recognize that you can get success, but it's better practice to put it on both edges. Why? Well, the water in the glue, this is a water-based glue, does a lot of good things for you in this case. It helps to swell the fiber. The glue enters the dry surface of the fiber, starts swelling that fiber, and that swelling aids for a strong glue joint. When those little fibers are swollen from the surface, from this dry surface, then under pressure they are clamped together. Those fibers mesh and the glue cures between the meshed fibers, makes it really strong. I have some paper towel now to wipe my fingers. This bit of time we spent here gives the glue some time to draw in and, as I say, expand the surface of the wood. And now dropping it down, and I'm going to pull them together. It's always a welcome sign to see a little bit of glue squeezing out. We can have too little glue, but in this case I'm not worried about that. Now my caul clamps. Holding the bar, as you see my right hand here, drop the head down and just give it a light tweaking to keep the boards flat or parallel to each other. That's what the cauls are doing. Okay, here they are. So the cauls are disallowing this. Now I like to start in the center. Many people will find that you've got edges that you don't want to damage. You don't want to bruise the edges with the steel head of the clamp. In that case, you may want to put a little block here. Okay, so over here, I'm going to have my pieces of scrap wood to act as little pads, compression pads, to protect the edges. My first clamp here, thumb behind the head of the clamp. Put this little pad on the outboard side and this little pad on the edge closest to me. Push the head forwards and give it a slight tension. And now be sure to get the center of the screw in the center of the joint. It's a fundamental to good gluing practices to always put pressure in the center of the joint. So now I'm going to squeeze it down good and tight, and I'm looking for that welcome sign to see some glue coming out of the glue line here. And it is. I'm very happy about that. Next clamp. So on this outboard end again, a clamp and a pad rather, and on here one as well. And making sure that the clamp screw is in the center of the thickness of the board, and then clamp down tight. If you have to make adjustments in the level of the clamp, don't loosen it completely. Just take the tension off and then shift it as you need to, rather than starting from scratch again. Okay, so that one's nice and tight. And the last one now, the pad on the outboard side again, and the pad on the inboard here. Gently tight, drop it down to make sure that I'm in the center of the thickness of the wood, and clamp down. Now you can give a slight tweaking down to the coil clamps to help keep those two flat. Now if you're working with a much wider panel, a dining room table for example, with maybe multiple pieces, it's a good idea to have one clamp up and one clamp down. One clamp up and one clamp down. What I mean by that is there'd be a clamp going underneath, coming out underneath the assembly, because the clamps have a natural tendency to bow the surface of the wood or to cup the surface of the wood towards the clamp. If we alternate the clamps up and down, we help equalize those forces and keep the boards flatter. If you are assembling a panel with multiple pieces, it's not a bad idea to look at the growth rings at the ends of the boards and to have one with growth rings facing to the outside and one with growth rings facing to the inside. And so you go, helping prevent the inevitable warpage that wood will exert just due to the changing moisture over time.